I am going to start the webinar, okay?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rosa Kettles. I'm the co-chair of Diversity and Inclusion. I'm here very happy, welcoming a special guest. And I want to thank our colleagues, our leaders for joining us, for supporting our initiative in diversity. And I'm going to now give it to Dr. Longa, who's our co-chair as well.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this event. And Julia, thank you so much for spending time with us. I know your schedule is very busy there in Washington, D.C., but we appreciate you taking some time to be with us. And welcome, Matheny family. This is going to be a great event, and I'm sure we're all going to learn from it. So sit back and enjoy. And I'm going to introduce Yvette, who is going to be our moderator for the day. And Yvette, you're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Longa. Thank you, Rosa, our great co-chairs of this wonderful diversity committee. Welcome to the Matheny family. We are so excited to have you here. My name is Yvette Mosquera. For those of you who don't know, I'm the Director of Marketing, PR, and Development. And we give a warm welcome to Julia Drost. Julia is our esteemed speaker today. She's a wonderful keynote speaker. We're very lucky to have her. And today's topic is overcoming barriers, how to elevate women at home and at work. Julia has extensive experience in the field of everything having to do with women, gender topics, equity, inclusion. And, you know, we're very lucky to have you here, Julia. Welcome today. Julia Drost is currently the Chief of Staff of Population Services International. And I give it over to you, Julia. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome, Yvette and Rosa and Dr. Longa. And hello, everyone. It's so nice to be with you. My name is Julia Drost, and it's just great to be with you here today. And I hope that everyone is staying strong and healthy now that we're over a year into the pandemic, which has been such a difficult year, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. So I hope everyone is hanging in there. And happy Women's History Month, which takes place every March as a way to recognize and celebrate the contributions and achievements women have made to US culture and society. So I'll just start by saying it's really great that Matheny is organizing this event in celebration of Women's History Month. And again, my appreciation to Rosa and Dr. Longa and Yvette for having me today. I understand you have a new president too. So if he's tuning in, welcome and all the best to you in your new role.
Yes, he is. Hi, Bill Kent, how are you? And I also wanted to say, Julia, I failed to mention that your aunt is a teacher at the Matheny School.
Yes.
And I want to thank Kim Drost for connecting us with you. We're so grateful to her. Thank you so much. And a shout out to the Matheny School.
Yes, and you beat me to it. I was going to also give a shout out to my aunt and your colleague, Kim, who was first in touch with me about joining you today. So, you know, I think I'll just start off by sharing just a bit of my background and my professional journey before getting into the topic that we're here to chat about today. So by way of background, I grew up in Vermont. I went to college in Vermont, and after school, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I've been here for the last 13 years. I began my career just down the street from where I live on Capitol Hill, working for a member of Congress, the congressman from Vermont, Peter Welch. And that's really where I developed my interest in, you know, what they call women's issues in Congress. And I worked my way up in his office, beginning as a very junior level staff assistant and taking on more and more responsibility as I gained more experience. And in progressing through the roles and the ranks, I was able to take on legislative work, which included things like violence against women and women's health. And, you know, that work made me feel really, really motivated. It was inspiring for me to want to make the world a better place and a more equal place for women and for all people who are marginalized in many ways by society. And from what I know about the great work that you all do at Matheny, I think we have that in common, that desire to want to do good and to help and support people and do our parts to make others' lives better. So for me, after working for the congressman for a few years, I decided I really wanted to go all in and devote all of my professional time advocating for policies that support women and advance gender equality. So I became a women's human rights policy advocate at Amnesty International. Some of you might be familiar with that organization. So that was here in Washington, D.C. as well. And my job was to work in advocacy to Congress for the protection of women's human rights through improving laws and policies on things, again, like ending violence against women in the US and internationally, advocating for women's health, LGBT rights, etc. Again, after a few years at Amnesty, I decided I wanted to go back to school to get a master's degree. And, I think an important point here is to say that it doesn't matter where you are in your career. It's always valuable to have more education. And it doesn't need to be a full degree, but taking courses, getting certificates, doing free online classes on topics that interest you, or even working your way through a reading list of important texts in your field. All of that is really important to continuing to develop as a professional. And I chose to go to the London School of Economics for a master's degree in gender policy and inequalities. And I learned a lot in that year in London. In particular, my mind was really greatly open to a bigger understanding of lots of different dimensions to inequality beyond just gender. So I returned to Washington after some time in London, and I, of course, wanted to stay working in the women and gender space. But I had a desire to move away from advocacy and get some more experience on the management side of running a nonprofit organization. So I was able to get a job as chief of staff at the International Center for Research on Women, which is a research institute that analyzes challenges facing women around the world. It works to build evidence and collect data on what kinds of programs and initiatives generate the best outcomes when it comes to things like ending child marriage, stopping gender-based violence, ensuring women have access to family planning, helping women be economically empowered. And my job as chief of staff was to support and advise the president of the organization, manage the board of directors, oversee communications and fundraising, and lead special initiatives. So it was a great job. It was a demanding job. And I learned a lot about what it means to run a nonprofit. And that led me to where I am today, which is also as chief of staff, but at a much larger organization called Population Services International, PSI. And we're a large international global health nonprofit that's really working on the front lines to provide critical healthcare services around the world. And we have about 6,000 staff working in 45 countries, mostly African countries, as well as countries in Southeast Asia and Latin America. And our big focus is on family planning, HIV prevention and treatment, malaria prevention, sanitation. And my job is a big one, but again, I just derive so much motivation from the good work that PSI does around the world to help people lead healthy lives, and especially to support women in making the choices they want for their own health and that of their families. So that's just a bit about me. And I'm happy to move into the theme of our discussion today, which is around elevating women. And that really is the goal, right? Elevating women. There obviously has been so much progress and advancement towards equality with men over the last several decades in this country, but sadly, we just aren't quite there yet. And we should all want women to be empowered, to have women be able to use agency and exercise choice, to be secure economically, to have opportunities, to be safe and healthy, and to be valued. So really, in short, the goal, as I kind of see it with my work and that I share with so many others, is for all women to be able to live their lives to their full potential. And we all want that. We want that for our friends, our families, our neighbors, for our patients, for our students. We really want that for ourselves too. However, unfortunately, too often women just aren't given a fair shot at reaching their full potential, or they're held back from achieving it. So really, we can't get to that place of women being elevated or of women being equal until we understand those barriers that women continue to face, whether that's in the workplace, in the home, or in society. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just talking about those barriers. And then, of course, we can't have any conversation without chatting about the unequal challenges that COVID has presented to women's lives and livelihoods. And I really believe, it isn't until we understand what these challenges are and these barriers that hold women back, it isn't until we understand them that we can do anything about it. Awareness really is the first step. And so I'll close my chat today with just sharing some ideas for how we can start to overcome those barriers. Great. So what are the barriers? What are the risks that women encounter in the workplace and at home and in society, more broadly speaking? I think perhaps you picked up on just hearing from my background, I can't talk about barriers that women face without first mentioning violence, harassment, discrimination. These are threats that are always present for women, and they really underpin every facet of women's lives. Some of you may have heard the statistic, which unfortunately has not changed in the last decade plus that I've been working on these issues, that 1 in 3 women around the world will experience violence in her lifetime. And most of it is at the hands of a partner in a domestic setting. And like I said, this threat, it underpins every facet of women's lives. It's just a very cross-cutting issue. Violence impacts women's ability to safely get an education or hold a job or stay healthy. And it's just so pervasive and compounded, unfortunately for many, by discrimination and hatred on the grounds of race or ethnicity or sexual identity, class, ability. And we've been seeing so much of that disproportionate violence against Black women and Asian American women, for example, brought to light recently. And when women experience multiple forms of discrimination based on how they identify, that only further restricts her choices and increases her vulnerability to violence. So when we look at specifically at the workplace, it really can be a minefield for women. Surely a lot has improved over the last several decades, but we're still far from where we should be. So just to kind of outline some of the barriers as I see them, and as we discuss even in our workplace at PSI. First, when it comes to entering the workplace, there's just inequitable opportunities. Women may not have the same opportunities as men when it comes to getting education and training and finding decent jobs. Often when women are in the workplace, there can be a lack of trust in their abilities, which leads to women being passed over for promotions or not given the same opportunity to advance that men may have. And as a result of this, you see less women and even fewer women of color or other minorities' identities in positions of leadership in organization. And when women don't see themselves represented at the top, whether I'm in middle management or I'm just starting out in my career, when I don't see women up there, this does harm to individual women's ambition and goal setting for their careers. Lack of inclusion in the workplace, that's another challenge that women can face. We all want to feel included and feel welcome and like we belong. And when someone doesn't have that at their work, and in fact, when they feel the opposite, when they're excluded, when they're cast out or discriminated against, that impacts how long they want to stay in a particular job and how well they do in that job. Often women are over scrutinized and held to different standards as men, or far worse, double standards too. For example, a woman could be viewed as too weak or meek to have a management role. And yet, if she tries to step up and be bold and assertive, can be accused of being intimidating or domineering. So these are tricky things to navigate. Women are also less inclined to negotiate their salary when given the opportunity. I know I've been through that a few times. It's tricky. It takes a lot of courage to ask for what you deserve. And I think everyone is probably familiar with the gender pay gap, which really is just a cruel manifestation of a number of these barriers that I've talked about to entry and promotion within the workplace. Broadly across this country, there's been very ineffective equal pay legislation, and you add the unpaid care burden, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that falls disproportionately on women. And what you end up with is women earning on average 82 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And I don't know if anyone noted, but 6 days ago, March 24, was what's called Equal Pay Day in the US. And that's significant because that is the day that on average, a woman has to work into the new year, so into 2021, in order to be paid the same amount that a man was paid in the year 2020, right? For the same or an equivalent position. And of course, that's far worse for women of color who have to work until August 3rd of this year to make what a man made in a similar position last year. Even worse for Native American women, that's September 8th, and Latino women, that's not until October 21st. So, just lots of big challenges here. And so to that point, I was talking about discrimination and harassment and violence. These things are all part of women's work lives too, as much as it impacts them on the street or in their home or other places that they may go. And they influence each other. Discrimination, sexual harassment is a huge stumbling block to women's careers. This is why there was so much momentum around the Me Too movement a few years ago, just really drawing attention to the impact that it can have. So, again, I'll say that all of these things I mentioned are only heightened for women of color or women of other minority identities, whether that be sexuality, religion, ability, ethnicity, language, and depending on how women identify, they are multiply burdened or marginalized. So I'd say before I jump into COVID too, I mentioned the care burden, and I just want to take a minute to explain that, because this is another major barrier to women's success in the workplace and how long she stays there, how much she earns, how valued she is. And that's this unpaid labor, or again, the care burden, that women disproportionately face. And I'm sure I don't need to tell many of you that balancing work and balancing family has, long been a reality for women in this country. And historically, women have been the primary caregivers in their families. And that's remained true even as more and more women work outside of the home and contribute significantly, in fact, to household income. But women working full-time spend 50% more time each day caring for children than fathers or other partners working full-time. Women do 2.5 times more work at home than men do. And that's no matter what country in the world. And, I really feel it's long past time to redistribute that workload. And so becoming a parent, and particularly becoming a mother, that's a key moment when career opportunities often take a hit. The time away from work that a woman is given to care for children when they are born is never enough, nor is it balanced enough as they grow. Our society is certainly not adequately set up to provide childcare support to working families, nor is the entire world of work designed with parents in mind. And so as a result, women often lose out on valuable next steps in their careers when they have to balance those family obligations. So really, the more that an individual, organization, and governments can do to support women so they don't have to compromise in their careers when they become parents or when they have elder care, the better. And, I want to put a plug in here too for men or secondary caregivers, I'll say. They should be given just as much paid leave as mothers or primary caregivers, right? I think it is until we sort out the inequality in how much time parents are given, whether you're primary or secondary caregiver, how much time off to care, then we won't change the inequities that continue to follow mothers throughout the lifespan of their children. So COVID specifically, and then I promise I'll get into some solutions to all these rather depressing state of affairs. But of course, the pandemic has had vast and really unequal impacts on lives and on livelihoods. And the outcomes have been very inequitable between men and women, and even more so for communities of color, which have been bearing the brunt in terms of health impact with more lives lost and the caregiving and economic impacts. So I think we've probably seen a lot of the headline statistics that in terms of unemployment, COVID has affected women's livelihoods much more drastically than men. Women have lost 5.4 million jobs since the pandemic started, and frankly has caused a lot of women's paid jobs, be clear, their paid jobs, to disappear, while their unpaid jobs, caring for their family, that load has only increased. As I just said, unpaid care work is already a huge barrier for women's economic equality, but schools closed, daycares closed. Many women were forced to leave the workforce altogether. I read the statistic that 1 in 4 women who became unemployed during the pandemic reported that they lost their job due to lack of childcare. And that was twice the rate of men who were surveyed. And nearly 2.1 million women have left the workforce entirely out of the pandemic and actually are no longer looking for a job. And again, of course, Black women and Latinas unfortunately disproportionately hit. Their pre-pandemic unemployment rates have doubled during COVID. So COVID, I don't have to tell anyone, just awful, terrible, really no good way to look at anything that's happened over the last year. But there might just be some bright spots, I think, for the world of work in general, and in a lot of cases, not all, but a lot. The world of work is going to look much different in the future, and I think for the better. Employees, including myself, starting to demand much more flexibilities and new ways of working. And that doesn't just mean more teleworking, but things like job sharing or part-time work, compressed hours, flex time, staggered hours. There's also really just a very active dialogue in US policy space around the ways that this country needs to be better in supporting parental caregivers. So we're moving in the right direction in a lot of these ways. And I think digital, just by and large, we're all here connecting in ways that we wouldn't have thought of before. It's really opening up a lot of new opportunities, and that applies specifically to certain communities, including people with disabilities. A lot more potential job opportunities that might not have been dreamed up before we hit this pandemic. So, overcoming the barriers, how to be successful. I hope it goes without saying that all of these things I've described are really big challenges, and it's not the responsibility of women to fix them. A lot of these things reflect what are, I'll say, very entrenched attitudes towards women, longstanding workplace inequalities, and much larger structural and systemic issues in the country and globally for that matter. And I certainly think overcoming them all is possible, and progress has been made. But it's going to take a whole of society effort. It'll take a policy effort and really big shifts in how the country and the workplace supports and values women. And I think, that all that said sounds really big. We have so much work to do, and it's true, but a lot of these barriers can begin to be addressed by just everyone doing better by each other and taking really individual responsibility for how others are experiencing your workplace. Ask yourself, how am I showing up in the workplace? What are my privileges? And how are my privileges potentially putting others at a disadvantage? Ask questions about what you're seeing happening around you, whether in the workplace, out on the street, wherever it may be. Why is this person being valued more than others? Why is that person's contributions not being recognized? I think we all need to stop accepting these inequalities when we see them, both the ones we experience for ourselves and when we see them happening to others around us. Naming those things when you see them happening, calling them out, drawing attention, that's just a huge first step. Practically, workplaces everywhere can do better by women and by men by having policies in place that support gender equality. Having things like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion councils, policies, anti-sexual harassment policies, better parental leave and support to new parents, and flexible working. So, I think I'll kind of start to wrap up by saying I would encourage everyone to think, what does empowerment mean to you? What would it feel like to be to be confident and really to be able to chart your own course. And I'm sure so many of you are, and that's fantastic. But many aren't. And I think that first kind of step in looking forward in your career is identifying what do I want? What does it feel like to be going after something in my career that I want? And then begin to plan out the steps to build up to it. You should ask others for input on how you reach that goal. And as you do plan out those steps, consider some of the barriers that you might encounter along the way and what actions you might take to overcome them, either by yourself or with support from others. And to that point, I will say women supporting women, it's so critical. This can be your friend, it can be your colleague. Take the time to find yourself a coach or a mentor. Build a group at your work to talk about specific issues that you're facing over lunch. Doesn't need to be formal. Look for role models too. They exist, they are around you. And men need to be allies too. And I mentioned the Me Too movement. It's been really so important for bringing attention to the issue of sexual abuse and harassment, and frankly, unhealthy gender norms. But an unfortunate aftershock of that is that we find less men who are willing to reach out and to mentor and to coach women, out of fear that they might do something wrong. And think that we can all figure out the lines between right and wrong, and I would encourage men to do so. And again, on a positive note, I think some of the traditional dynamics are changing, and especially what we've seen in the last year plus, which is a welcome prioritization of creating more equitable opportunities for communities of color with accessing jobs. And I'm hoping that as I was going through those barriers, though, what we need to take away is that, getting a job is just the first step. And we all have a responsibility to create a more equitable and inclusive and safe workplace for everyone. I talked about inclusion before. We talk about it all the time at PSI, that feeling of being valued and welcome. And it doesn't just happen automatically, right? It needs to be built for all of us. Because we all have biases, whether they're conscious as well as or unconscious. I certainly have them. We all do. That's just the way that society has made us grow up. We need to learn, though, and acknowledge our biases and have people around you to help to check them, just so we can, all make a good faith effort to better understand the experiences of different people that we work with, people in our communities, whether that's women or people of color, people with a different religion, all of it. And that's really how we start to build inclusion and cultural competency and really just a broader culture of respect. And then I think we're all the better for it. So Iveth, I think I'll pause there, turn it over to you.
Hello, Julia. Oh, the information that you have given us today is really invaluable, because we all know that there are challenges out there, but I don't think we really sit down and realize the depth and the breadth of challenges that we as women have to face every day. And that's why we have you here today, because we want to make sure that people are aware about these things. We don't want to depress people and, but this is the world that we live in, and it's important for us to talk about them before we can start to fix things, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so I'm so appreciative that you are here and that you've brought all of these issues to light. And I think we are starting to become better in many ways. Of course, there are still challenges, unfortunately, with recent events with violence against Asian women. And, it really, it's a setback, but it also brings awareness, and it makes us realize that we have to do better. And we have to learn from each other. And one of the biggest things that I took away from what you just said is that there are so many opportunities for us to learn from each other. And I think we're doing it. I think we're starting to do it. You know, here at Matheny, especially with the Diversity Committee, they've been very active this year with the Zoom. And, you know, I think we've been able to reach a few more people that way. And I think, you know, Dr. Longa and Rosa, when they come back here, they'll tell you, you know, that it's been really good. It's been good. You know, we're getting better at it. We're communicating with each other more, and people are becoming more aware. So I have a few questions that the committee came up for you. And the first question is about the male audience. So what would you say to the male audience on the struggles that women face each day, and how can they be part of supporting women in the workforce?
Great. Well, thank you for the question and for your reflections on where Matheny is with a number of the things that we've been talking about. That's really great to hear. Awareness, yes, it's just so hugely important for tackling everything that we're talking about. And I mentioned men previously, so I'm glad to have the chance to chat about those in the male audience a bit more and what their role is. I'd say first and foremost, you know, take the time to learn about the challenges your female colleagues face, whether that's in the home, in the street, at work, in society in general. You know, ask them, do some reading. And it's not just your female colleagues or friends, but your mother, your sister, your wife, your daughter. Again, awareness, try to build that understanding of some of women's unique vulnerabilities. And then once you start to understand those things, men need to be willing to, you know, ask themselves what ways they might be, whether intentionally or not. And I'm sure it's mostly unintentional, but what ways they might be adding to those struggles. And that requires some self-reflection. And that means recognizing that as a male, you carry certain privilege. And that's particularly true for white men. And you may be the nicest male colleague, and I'm sure that applies to everyone at Matheny, but if you don't recognize that there is a difference between how people regard you when you enter a room or how people react to you in the street compared to your female colleague, then you're really not doing anything to help change the norms and therefore not being as supportive to women as you could be. You know, in fact, I would go so far as to say not being willing to think about your own role in these inequities means you're almost complicit by not engaging in the dialogue, right? And doing these things is what it means to be an ally to women. And, you know, I do just want to say society is hard on women, but it's also really hard on men. So I'm not just, you know, giving a pass here in that way. From an early age, generally speaking, you know, boys are taught to fit into what are pretty rigid norms for masculinity and what it means to, quote, be a man, right? Be tough, fight for what you deserve, never fail, work hard, don't be emotional and hide your feelings. And then later on, as these boys grow into men, society seems to reward those traits that are most associated with masculinity. So, you know, be assertive, talk over women, be ambitious, don't let anything get in your way, and be strong, courageous, independent. And of course, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being strong or courageous, right? But when it's at others' expense, then these traits really become a problem. And these kinds of gender norms are harmful, not only because they pit women as the opposite, right? So if men are strong and courageous and brave, you know, women are weak, subservient, emotional, unstable. And that leads to a lot of toxicity, which in turn leads to what's, I'd say, is an exacerbation of what is actually false differences between women and men. And this can lead to, you know, more discrimination, harassment, et cetera. And so, you know, if you've found some kind of the tips or things I was saying earlier helpful, I think I would say, you know, what men can do in the day to day, just some questions to think of as you're going through your day, and to ask yourselves, you know, are you always speaking first in a meeting? Are you interrupting or speaking over women? Do you stand up for a female colleague when you see her being repeatedly interrupted or spoken over? Similar to that, do you listen to women? Do you draw attention to the fact that a woman, say, isn't being called on, or that her ideas aren't picked up, or things that she's requesting are overlooked? Do you assume that women are capable and competent, or do you actually think the opposite? Are you making physical space for women in a room and taking yourself out of the center? That's a huge thing, physical space, and how we occupy the space around us. Do you praise your colleagues for her good ideas, or do you take them for your own? I hope not. Going a step further, when you hear, jokes that are sexist, or you even witness harassing behavior, are you calling it out? Are you being brave in that way? Are you including women in work-related gatherings? That kind of gets to the inclusion point I was making. And are you offering to mentor and coach a female employee? Or, are you shying away because you're nervous or scared about saying or doing the wrong thing? So, with all the privileges I think that come with being a male, what comes with that is a lot of power, right? And this means, in a good way, that men have the power to help rewrite the script, so to speak, for how women are treated, and help redistribute that power between women and men, so that everyone can equally contribute to a better society and community, to their workplace, and so everyone can just really feel safe and valued and included while they're contributing.
That's amazing. Thank you. I think you were very comprehensive in your answer. And I think that a lot of our male colleagues, as wonderful as they are and as supportive as they are, I think, the questions that you raised is really something that maybe they didn't think about before, and they're all well-intentioned, they're all nice guys, but sometimes you just go about your day without thinking further about the other person in the room. And so I really love
Exactly.
those questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Our second question is, can you describe a risk that you took in your career that did not work out as planned, and what did you learn from that event? Secondly, part B of that question is, what life lessons did you learn from that experience, and that you applied to your career going forward?
Yeah, those are great questions. And I'll say that lots of things don't go as planned, right? And everyone should know that more things will go not as planned than planned, right? And I think a good and very early in my career example of this was years ago when I went for a promotion. It was a stretch for me. This was back when I worked for the member of Congress. And it was tough because it was a small office. There were 12 of us, 13, 14. And the people that were going for it were myself and one other woman. And of course, everyone knew that we were both going for that promotion, and I didn't get it. She got it. And that was really a bitter pill to swallow. And I found afterwards it was really difficult to stay motivated, to stay positive, particularly when we were both continuing in that same workplace together. And I saw her advance and grow in her new role. But, it was a learning experience, right? Mainly in that I saw it really impact my confidence going forward. And that is just something that should never, ever happen. I know it's easy to say, but it's just so important that we should never let anything impact our belief in ourselves and in our abilities. So my takeaway, my lesson from that was to never let anything like not getting a job or a promotion really shake my belief in myself and my abilities. It's a very competitive world out there. People get jobs, other people don't get jobs. There's a number of great reasons for that. And I think what this kind of points to too is, so often women start from a place of not thinking that they're good enough, or they're smart enough, or they're experienced enough. And then they don't try. They don't take that next step in their career. They don't shoot for something when they certainly are very qualified and would be a fine candidate. They're just lacking in the confidence to think that we can get the job or land the promotion. And we need to be courageous. And I think this is one of the only times you'll hear me say this, but we need to be more like men in those circumstances. There's a lot of literature out there on how men start from a place of believing that they can. Whether or not they're qualified is a whole other topic. And so this is another important lesson for me too. And just that things are really challenging in the world of work, and I don't need to add to the burden by not believing in myself. I'd say kind of the good news is that it wasn't until now that I've thought about that situation so many years ago, and that promotion that I didn't get. So, you move on, you'll be successful another time. And I think one more thing to kind of draw from that, a lesson that I've been pulling from a lot lately actually, is about being brave and asking for what you want. Whether, again, that's the promotion or it's a raise. I mentioned that women far often than not do not negotiate for a raise or for their salary when they're beginning a new job. Or you really want a telework benefit or just anything. You should never hesitate to advocate for yourself because no one else will do it, right? You may have a good manager or supervisor, I'm sure many of you do, who will advocate for you, but they're not going to know what's important to you unless you first advocate for yourself. But the kind of caveat there is make sure that you're prepared when you do it. Do your homework, have all the information, have the data, have the facts, practice your pitch. Just like you'd practice for a job interview or a presentation, when you're going to have a courageous conversation, especially one that makes you nervous and you're worried about what you're going to be asking, you need to practice it. And I promise it will go a lot better that way.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So we have about 15 minutes left. I wanted to ask you one more question before we go on to the audience Q&A. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. But what are some practical and affordable tools, resources that any woman can use to get herself ready for her next career move?
Yeah, this is such an important question. Thank you for asking it. And I think overall, it's never too early to start preparing for your next career move, mainly because what I think is one of the most important things to do to get ready for your next job takes time. And that thing is building your professional network. This is something you should be doing as early and often as you possibly can. And so what does that mean, building your career network? It means talking to people who have gone in a career direction that you want to go in. Learn from others. We're all unique, we're all special, we all have our own strengths, but more often than not, there are likely other people who've gone down a similar path to one that you want to follow. Or there's people who role model, the next professional step you want to take. So talk to them, seek them out, learn from them. People love to talk about themselves. And, especially today with everything happening virtually, it's easier than ever to make connections to other professionals and say, please, I want to learn, like, what was your journey like? How did you get to where you are today? So, you start by having a conversation about career pathways, let's say with a colleague that you admire, and you learn how you got to where they are. And that's really what's called, an informational interview. And then you ask that colleague, hey, I would love for you to introduce me to another person that you know who I can also learn from. You have a conversation with that person about their career journey, ask them to connect you, and so on and so forth. So, you're really just building up that network of people who can support you when you need it. LinkedIn, I'll say, is a really great tool to search for other professionals in your field too. I'm guessing many of you already belong to professional associations too, whether that be healthcare, educational groups. Just really think about who you know and who you can learn from and build from there. And this way, when it comes time to apply for a new job, you have people who'll be willing to give you advice. Maybe they'll review your resume for you, or better yet, they might even know someone at a place where you're applying and be willing to put in a good word. When I was applying for the job at Amnesty International, there were over 200 applicants for the job, I later learned. And it was only because a woman I knew at another organization flagged my name for the hiring manager. And I was able to get that job because they gave me a chance. That's frankly how I've gotten all of my jobs, is because of the network that I've built and the connections that I've made. yeah, all of those other 200 people who applied for that job, I'm sure they were very talented, but just getting your name in front of the right people and having them being willing to give you a chance, it's a huge thing that your network can help with. Just finally, I'll say, kind of other advice, and I mentioned earlier, but when you're out there networking, you're going to encounter some really fantastic women and men, and I'm sure you might find yourself drawn to someone that you're really learning from and you want to have another conversation. Consider, asking for that conversation and learning maybe that person might be willing to be a coach or a mentor to you, right? So it's more than just one conversation, but they're there for you to call on, every couple months or what have you. And it's not easy to come by, but there's also, of course, services out there that offer coaching. And I actually had a career coach last year, which was a great experience. And I will say that she was free. And that is because she was doing her certification to become a coach and needed a certain number of practice hours. So there's ways to get that support you need. And again, you often don't have to look that far. My girlfriends and I, some of us work in the same field, some are in different fields, but we often discuss our jobs and what our challenges are. And there's usually a lot of similarities between what any one of us might be experiencing. And so be open with your friends and your family that you trust. And then especially if you have any of those friends or colleagues with special skills to review your resume or cover letter, conduct a mock interview with you, the more support you can get with all of those things, the better.
Yeah, and I know that here at Matheny, they love to promote within. So that's a really great, feature, I think, that people may not think about. There's always open positions that you might qualify for that you didn't even, think about it. And
Right.
and I know that here there's also resources for support for mental health support, career support and things like that. Sometimes we just forget about those tools, and don't take advantage of them. So let me take a couple of questions from the Q&A. And I think one of them you've already answered, which was the one about how can men support women in the workplace. And then the other one is, how do you build trust around people if you struggle to trust others?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, I personally have struggled a bit myself over the years when I've been in management positions with, I'm a very type A. I want to do everything myself, so I know it gets done and get done the way I want it to be done. But that's not a good way to be a manager, and needing to delegate tasks to others so they can learn and grow as professionals. But I've always kind of struggled with the trust that it'll get done the way that I want it to. I think an important first step is kind of going back to what I was, posing to the men in the audience is take some time and look inward and say, why am I struggling to trust? Is there something about this team dynamic that makes me feel that something's not going to go well? Did something happen that upset you? There could be so many different reasons why we struggle to trust. And so it's really critical to take that first step of looking inside yourself and understanding a bit more about the why. And then once you can identify that, potentially that means you're going to have a conversation, a courageous conversation. They don't call it that for any reason other than it's hard. It's difficult to be able to say, to a colleague, hey, I'm struggling with trust right now with you because of X, Y, or Z. I'd really like to talk about that and to do that in a way that's not threatening, to do it in a way that's constructive. It's really, really difficult, but I think your baseline is trying to understand why you might not trust, doing what you can to root out those issues, because from the way the question is, it sounds like this person wants to build trust around people, and And really, just like anything, you won't be able to do that unless you yourself are being the best role model of it that you can possibly be. So do a little self-diagnosis, see what you come up with, potentially have some courageous conversations. And if you're not feeling in a position to do that, talk with, let's say, a third party that's not involved in this, and share, this is why I'm thinking I'm struggling in this way. And I want to build trust among my colleagues and those I work with, but I'm struggling with this, and see how they can be helpful too. That's my mantra with everything. Whenever I'm struggling to figure out, how do I talk about this with someone? How should I approach that? It's talking to those other colleagues and people that I value their opinion. And that's usually a good place to start.
Wonderful. I do have one more question, quick question before I bring back Peter and Rosa. Women, as you know, are often pulled in 100 different directions. How do you balance your successful career with family and make time for yourself?
Yeah, that's not easy. It is easy for me, and I don't even have kids. I have a fiance and I have a dog, and I'll let you decide which one you think is more work. But so I have it easy compared to most, but still, I think between a demanding job and everything else that needs to happen in life on a day-to-day basis, there's days where I feel like I can't catch my breath. And I think that first and foremost, allowing yourself to take a break and not being too hard on yourself. It kind of comes back to what I was saying about how my confidence took a hit after not getting that job. If you don't get to all 50 things in your to-do list that day, like, that's okay. Recognize that you can't do it all. Knowing your limits is another really important part of self-awareness as a professional and as a human, as a human being. So, prioritize, of course, what you must do, and save the rest for tomorrow. I feel I'm able to communicate what I need to my fiance, where I need him to step in and help, and that allows me to get a bit of flexibility for things that I want to do for myself. I think, I can't not say that, as I've said a few times now, for all the advances that women have made in the workplace, women are still disproportionately impacted by the care burden, which is the reason why, to the question, you're pulled in 100 different directions and are struggling to make time for yourself. So having a courageous conversation, as I said before, with your partner about redistributing the care burden, it's a first step, though I know how difficult that can be, and certainly not even possible for single parents who may be out there. So I hope that there's some bigger, more impactful policy changes for all of us in the years ahead. So, overall, I'll say even 30 minutes where you can carve it out, put it on your calendar, say, this is my time. It's small, but it matters for your peace of mind and for your balance. And then bigger amounts of time where you can too, and really just be okay with saying no. My fiance was bugging me every single day for the last week for a haircut. And I was like, no, I'm not, I can't do it. I'm busy. I have this, I have that. We'll do it this day, which is when it worked for me. Women are traditionally a lot less comfortable saying no, as we know. So, practicing that and utilizing it when you're feeling overstretched is really important for your mental health.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our co-hosts are coming back now. Rosa.
Yes, Julia, on behalf of Matheny and our diversity committee, we thank you for sharing your experience and your professional background. The special learning that we take away is refreshing and positive, giving us ideas and resources on how women can be successful in balancing work-family life. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa.
You're welcome.
Yes, Julia, I also want to say thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule. To me, this was the icing to the cake. for the celebration of our Women's Month. It's very uplifting, a lot of knowledge that we all gain today. So thank you so much. Also, many thanks to Yvette for doing such a great job in moderating.
Yes.
And also many thanks to our Matheny family for taking time out of their busy schedules to spend the 1 hour with us today. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. Julia, we hope this will not be the last time that we see you.
Yeah, I hope not either. I hope not. Can I just say, you know, I understand from the work that you all do, it's just incredible, and it's really inspiring, and you're clearly making a difference in the lives of so many. So I hope that some of the conversation was helpful and resonated with you all, and that we can continue it down the road.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it was excellent. And I'm sure everyone took away something today, especially our guys. And you know, we love them, and thank you again for this. I think we have so much more to keep talking about. We have so much more to cover. So we hope to invite you again to Matheny, and maybe in person, hopefully at one point.
Yeah,
You know, you can
fingers
come
crossed.
and tour Matheny
love
at
to.
some point. Thank you
Great.
again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dr. Longa. Thanks,
Thank you.
Rosa.
Thank you
Thank you,
all.
To our audience.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy
Bye-bye.
Women's History Month.
Happy Women's
Yes.
History Month.